My name is David Pick, and I was named after my great-great-grandfather, who was Rabbi David Pick. I didn't know that my father was Jewish until I was 18. I think he told me on my 18th birthday. It puzzled me for several months after he told me. I didn't really know what to make of it. Well, it turns out that my Jewish side we can trace back to the 1600s. My father was a completely secular Jew. He had to leave Nazi Germany simply because he was Jewish, but he didn't practice in any way, shape or form. So my father started a new life in England with my mother. He completely wanted to forget about his life in pre-war Germany. He never mentioned it to me at all. I think he was very mindful of the fact that there'd been great persecution. So himself and my mother lived a fairly ordinary, non-religious life. When I got to the age of about 39, I'd been living a very worldly life, well into the world, doing quite a lot of bad things that looking back I'm quite ashamed of. I had quite a good career job at the time. I suppose I was at the pinnacle of my career life, but in the period of about a week I lost my job. I was filled with the Spirit and I went to church for the first time, all in a period of about 7 days. So it was a very dramatic change in my life. My life was sort of turned upside down. To encounter the power of God when I first believed was absolutely amazing, particularly having come from absolutely nowhere in terms of religious background. And for the first few years as a new believer, I was completely over the top. I've never been an evangelist, but in your first few years you can be so high on the Spirit and your new experience that you go around sharing your faith with everybody. I was that annoying new Christian, yes. So round about 10 years ago, Kathy and I went to Israel for the first time. For the first 3 days, we were both actually overwhelmed, basically, to be in the land for the first time and walking where Jesus walked. We had a free day and most of us went to worship at Christ Church. I had an amazing encounter with the Holy Spirit at Christ Church. I was shedding buckets during the service, which I assumed was normal for Christ Church, but when I looked around at everybody I realised it wasn't. It was just me. God had been speaking to me very powerfully. I was weeping buckets, which is something I hadn't done since the first few months of my conversion. And it's only looking back that I realised that this was really the source of the river which was to turn into a two-stranded one, into a revelation of my own Jewish background and the significance of the Jewish people in God's purposes. Now, when we went back to England, I decided to read up on Christ Church, and I found out that Christ Church was part of what was called CMJ, the church's ministry amongst the Jewish people. After a period of a few months, God began to speak to me again and gave me a revelation into the significance of the Jewish people. The Gentile church comes from the early church, which is the Jewish church, that the Gentiles are actually grafted into the Jewish believers. I think it's from Romans 11, and this had a very powerful effect on my life and my theology. This was a complete revelation. It was as much a revelation as the original born-again experience. The second revelation I got, which sort of unpacked itself around about the same time, was to my own Jewish background and the importance of that. Being of Jewish background on my father's side, Gentile background on my mother's side, in some way that I don't understand, these two had somehow come together in me. There not being any believers on either side of the family, going back goodness knows how many years, I sometimes felt, without being arrogant, that I was a sort of a one new man myself. I think this has now completely altered my life as a Christian, in that it's really brought about a completeness to my understanding of God, the understanding of the Bible. And looking back, I just didn't have that completion. I only had a partial understanding. I'm very, very active now in Jewish ministry, and I find God is using me quite powerfully to speak to people in the camp that I was in before, which is a Gentile Christian with not a great deal or any understanding of Jewish roots. You meet quite a lot of opposition in this, but you have to persevere. And I can understand from their point of view that they have scales in front of their eyes, just as I have. A lot of this is a revelation to many people. We're in end times, and we haven't got to the point yet where the Gentile church has got the revelation into the fact that it's grafted into the Jewish people. But this is now starting to happen. It's a real honour for me, I think, to be used by God to help spread this revelation to the Jewish and the Gentile church about God's end time purposes and how things are coming to completion now, how the Jewish people are coming to awareness of the Messiah. The Gentile church is coming to an understanding of the Jewish roots from which it comes, and it's fantastic that God is using me in this way, and thank Him for it.